The evening sun was dropping low, stretching long shadows across the busted-up sidewalk, while I sat curled on the cold concrete curb. Even though the spring air still held a bit of warmth, my thin body couldn't stop shaking, and that familiar, hollow ache in my stomach twisted again, same one that had been gnawing at me for the last 5 days straight. People hurried past on their way home from work, heels and dress shoes clicking like a rhythm I didn't belong to. A woman in a sharp business suit talked loudly into her phone, arguing about dinner reservations. A young couple strolled by hand in hand, laughing about which restaurant they should try that night. The smell of fresh bread drifted over from the bakery across the street, warm and sweet, and it made my mouth water so hard my stomach cramped like it was tying itself in knots. I pulled my old backpack into my lap and hugged it close, almost like it could shield me from the world. Everything I owned fit inside that little bag: an old, thin blanket, a couple of wrinkled shirts, and a photo of my mom. The picture was creased at the corners from me fighting to keep her face alive in my memory, touching it more times than I could count just to remember her smile and the way her hands used to feel when she fixed my hair. A mother and her daughter passed in front of me, the little girl skipping and swinging her mom's arm. My throat tightened so fast it hurt, and I had to look away. I stared down at a piece of gum stuck to the sidewalk just so I wouldn't start crying again. It had been 2 years since my own mom died, but the pain still felt sharp, like a wound everyone forgot to stitch shut. My legs were going numb from sitting there so long, but I couldn't seem to find enough strength to stand. I tried to think back to the last real thing I ate. Maybe it was that half-eaten sandwich I pulled from behind the deli 3 days ago, or maybe that was 4. Lately, the days had blurred into one long stretch of tired hunger. When I finally pushed myself up, the world swayed around me, and little black dots dotted the air. I forced myself to stand anyway. I couldn't stay in that spot forever. Someone always came along eventually to tell me to move, and I'd learned the hard way it was better to leave before anyone started yelling. My legs felt like rubber while I shuffled down the street, keeping one hand on the brick wall just to stay steady. Dumpsters behind the restaurants were usually my best chance at finding anything to eat. I'd memorized which ones got tossed out and when, but today I was too weak to keep track of anything. The first dumpster was already empty. The next one too. The third one had a heavy lock on it. Behind the Chinese place, I spotted a couple of containers with leftover rice, but when I lifted the lids, I saw fuzzy patches of mold growing across the top. My stomach let out a growl so loud I almost convinced myself to eat it anyway. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying not to cry. Getting sick out here would be the one thing worse than being hungry. Most people didn't understand. If you get sick on the streets, you're done. Each step down that alley felt heavier than the last. The world tilted and swayed around me like it was being pulled off its hinges. I focused on placing one foot in front of the other, but my legs finally gave up. My knees buckled, and I hit the ground hard. My palms scraped against the rough asphalt when I tried to catch myself. I managed to twist my body enough so I didn't slam straight onto my face, but the fall still knocked the air out of my lungs. Cold seeped right through my thin jacket. I knew I needed to get up. I always needed to get up, but my body refused to move. All I could do was lie there and watch the shadows stretch longer and darker around me. A rat scurried past, close enough that I felt the air move by my cheek. I didn't even flinch. I just shut my eyes, too drained to keep them open any longer. The noise of the city faded away until it felt like I was sinking into the dark alone. Before you keep listening, let me know in the comments where in the world you're watching from today. Now, back to the story. The bright fluorescent lights spilling out from Joe's all-night diner washed over the sidewalk, giving everything that harsh glow cheap bulbs always have. Leaning on the wall, I slowly pushed myself upright, my legs shaking like they didn't know how to work anymore. My vision swam again, little black flecks drifting around the edges. My stomach felt like it was trying to devour itself from the inside. The smell of bacon and hash browns floated out through the diner's vents, rich and warm, and the scent hit me so hard it almost hurt. I couldn't remember the last time food smelled that good. Through the streaked windows, I watched folks tucked into warm booths, bent over plates piled with food and steaming mugs of coffee. My jacket was too thin to fight off the evening chill, and I hugged myself, feeling my ribs poke through the worn fabric. The warmth inside the diner looked like heaven, but I knew better than to try going in. No money, no chance, not looking like I did. so I slipped around the back where the dumpsters were lined up like metal giants. Maybe, just maybe, the kitchen had tossed something that wasn't spoiled beyond saving. With my hands trembling, I reached up to lift the heavy lid. "Hey!" The sharp voice made me jump. "Get away from there." A waitress stood in the open back door, dish towel slung over her shoulder, her face tight and annoyed. I stumbled back, nearly losing my balance. "I'm sorry," I whispered, barely getting the words out. I'm really hungry." For a second, her expression softened, but just as quickly, the hardness came back. "Can't help you. Boss's rules. No handouts." I nodded, forcing myself not to cry as I walked back toward the front of the building. I leaned against the wall, trying to disappear into the brick. Through the window, I watched a man cut into a stack of pancakes, syrup sliding down the sides like slow-moving lava. My stomach cramped so sharply I bit my lip to keep from making a sound. A couple walked out of the diner, bringing the smell of hot coffee with them. The woman saw me, clutched her purse tight, and hurried away with her husband. I was used to that look. Folks acted like just being near someone like me might somehow ruin their day or their life. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, watching the blurry shapes move inside. The warmth radiating through the window felt good against my skin, like a small reminder of what comfort used to feel like. Maybe I could stand here a little while, pretend I was waiting for someone. But the thought almost made me laugh. Nobody was coming for me. Nobody had in a long, long time. The low rumble of a motorcycle rolled through the evening quiet like distant thunder. It grew louder and louder until it stopped right in front of the diner, the engine buzzing so hard it made the windows tremble before the rider cut it off. I kept my eyes glued to the ground, trying to shrink myself into nothing. Drawing attention on the streets usually meant trouble, and I'd learned that lesson more than once. Heavy boots thudded closer across the concrete toward the diner's door. Through the mess of my tangled hair, I caught a glimpse of worn leather, faded denim, and legs thick with muscle. The man was huge, tall, broad-shouldered, built like he belonged in another world entirely. His arms were covered in ink that disappeared under a leather vest, and on his back was a patch I recognized instantly: Hell's Angels. When he opened the diner door, the bell above it jingled cheerfully, a sound that didn't match him at all. He paused there, and I felt his eyes land on me. I held my breath, praying he'd just walk inside and forget I existed. But I could feel him studying me, seeing me in a way most people never did. My hands shook as I clutched my little backpack tighter. His shadow fell across my face, and for a moment all I could think was, "Please don't yell, please don't hurt me." The patches on his vest told me exactly what club he rode with, and my heart skipped. But then, something about his eyes didn't match the rest of him. They weren't cold. They weren't mean. "Pack your things. You're coming with me." His voice was rough, steady, and so unexpected that I blinked like I'd misheard. People usually crossed the street to avoid looking at me. Some shooed me away like I was a stray dog. But this man, this stranger, was talking to me. I tried to speak, but my throat was too dry, my voice barely more than sandpaper. "Look, kid," he said, his tone softening just enough that I felt it. "You haven't eaten in days. Anyone can see that. And I'm not about to stand here and watch you fall apart." The harsh diner lights cast deep shadows across his face, highlighting every scar and every line life had carved into him. Tattoos twisted up his arms, dragons, skulls, words I couldn't read, but his expression held something I hadn't seen in a long time: real concern. I glanced around the diner. A couple of customers stared before jerking their eyes away. The waitress behind the counter suddenly got very busy wiping the same spot she'd been scrubbing for minutes. "Why?" I finally croaked out, barely trusting my own voice. "Because someone once did the same for me," he said simply. "Name's Jack, and you look like you could use a hand." My fingers tightened around the strap of my backpack. Every instinct screamed at me to run. Nothing in life came free. I'd learned that early. But my legs were too weak, my stomach too empty, and something in his voice tugged at a part of me I thought had died. "I don't." I started, but he gently cut me off. "You don't have to trust me." "Hell, I wouldn't trust me either," he said with a rough little chuckle. "But you need to eat. And I've got food." Just hearing the word food made my head swim. My body practically begged me to believe him. I pushed myself to my feet, my legs trembling like they might give out any second. "Okay," I whispered, surprising myself more than anyone else. Jack nodded once and walked toward the door. I followed him outside, the cool night air brushing against my face like a reminder I was still alive. Parked at the curb was a massive motorcycle, chrome shining under the streetlights, leather seat worn in all the right places. "Ever been on a bike before?" he asked as he swung his leg over the seat. I shook my head. "Then hold on tight," he said, patting the space behind him. "And don't worry, I take it easy when I've got a passenger." I hesitated only a moment before climbing on. The seat was cold beneath me, and I placed my hands lightly against his sides, nervous about touching him at all. "You'll fall right off like that," he said over his shoulder. "Grip tighter, kid. And when I lean with me. It's kind of like dancing, just follow my lead." The motorcycle roared to life, and I flinched as the vibration ran through my whole body. Then we pulled away from the curb, and the city lights smeared into streaks around us. The wind hit my face, sharp and fast, and for the first time in days, my mind stopped spinning. I didn't think about food or cold or loneliness. I just held on as we weaved through the streets, the powerful machine eating up the miles beneath us. I found myself gripping him tighter with each turn, my fears slowly melting into something else. Maybe hope, maybe desperation. I couldn't tell the difference anymore. Eventually, the bike slowed and rumbled to a stop in front of a small blue house with old white trim. The paint was fading, but the lawn was neat, and potted plants lined the walkway. It looked lived in. Safe. My legs wobbled as I climbed off the bike. Hunger made my whole body ache. Jack pulled out a set of keys, the metal jingling in the still evening air. "It's not much," he said in that gruff voice of his, "but it's home." Inside, warm lamplight filled a cozy living room. The furniture was worn but clean, big brown couch, mismatched armchairs, a decent TV on the wall. But what caught my eye most were the teenagers gathered around. A boy with dark hair lounged on the couch with a book. Two girls sat cross-legged on the floor, a deck of cards between them. Another boy stood in the kitchen doorway holding a glass of water. They all stopped what they were doing when we walked in. "Everyone," Jack said, his voice carrying through the room. "This is Lily. She's going to be staying with us for a bit." He gestured toward each kid in turn. Marcus on the couch, Sarah and Jenny with the cards, and Tom over there pretending he's not eavesdropping. They offered small waves and quiet, "Hey, yes." I folded my arms over myself, suddenly painfully aware of my dirty clothes, my tangled hair, the grime on my skin. These kids looked healthy, federal safe. They weren't like the street kids I was used to seeing. "First things first," Jack said, heading toward the kitchen. "Let's get some food in you." I followed him, my legs still shaking, this time from something that felt almost like relief. The kitchen was small, but everything had its place. A round table sat in the middle, big enough for 6 people, and it felt strangely welcoming after everything I'd been through. Jack pulled a container of leftover soup from the fridge, popped the lid off, and set it on the stove to warm. The second the smell hit the air, my mouth started watering so fast it almost hurt. "I run this place," Jack said casually as he stirred the pot. Like this was the most normal setup in the world. Kids who need somewhere to land for a bit, they come here. Some stay a few days. Some stay longer. We keep things simple. No drugs. No violence. Everybody pitches in. But you get 3 meals, a warm bed, and people who know what you're walking through. I sank into a chair at the table, my mind struggling to keep up. This rough, tattooed giant of a man, someone I should have been afraid of on the street, was taking in kids like me? And the ones I'd seen earlier weren't scared. They fit here. They were comfortable. They were safe. "Why?" I whispered, barely getting the word out. Jack didn't answer right away. He ladled the soup into a bowl, steam curling up into the air, and set it in front of me along with a spoon. "Because someone should," he said finally. "And because I've been where you are. I know what it feels like to think nobody gives a damn." I noticed the other teens drifting into the doorway, quiet but curious. Their faces weren't judgmental. They were soft, familiar in a way that made something inside me ache. Sympathy. Understanding. Things I hadn't seen directed at me in a long time. My hands shook as I picked up the spoon. The first sip of that soup, warm, salty, real, spread through me like sunlight after a long winter. And for a moment, I felt something I didn't even recognize at first. Safety. But the past has a way of whispering in your ear when things get too calm. Memories rose up behind my eyes, shadows I couldn't outrun. So even as I ate slowly, savoring every bite, some part of me stayed braced for the moment everything would fall apart again. The others drifted back to whatever they'd been doing, and Jack moved around the house with a kind of quiet authority, like a guardian who didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. Moonlight filtered through thin curtains in the little guest room Jack showed me to later. The walls were worn but clean, and the whole room smelled faintly of detergent. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, my hands resting on my full stomach, the first full stomach I'd had in days. The mattress felt almost too soft, like if I relaxed into it, it would swallow me. And the quiet was almost suffocating after months of sirens, shouting, traffic, and the constant churn of fear out on the streets. I should have been able to sleep, but instead the memories came. My mom's face, pale, thin, tired, lying in the hospital bed. Her wedding ring so loose it slipped off her finger. The way that heart monitor beeped one last flat, endless sound that I'll never forget as long as I live. I squeezed my eyes shut, but the memories kept coming. My dad in his armchair afterward, staring at nothing. The bottles piling up. His warm eyes turning glassy and far away. The morning I woke to find him gone, with nothing but a sloppy note saying he was sorry. I curled onto my side and pulled the blanket up to my chin. It smelled like fresh laundry, and it reminded me of the way Mom used to fold sheets right out of the dryer. The house used to smell clean, warm, like things were okay, before they weren't. Outside, a car drove past, headlights sweeping across the ceiling. I watched the light move, remembering how I used to pretend those cars were off on adventures, heading to places where good things happened. Back then, I still believed in happy endings. Now, I wasn't so sure. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. Heavy, but careful. Jack. I'd already learned the rhythm of his walk. They paused at my door, followed by a soft knock. "You awake, kid?" he whispered. I didn't answer right away. Nobody had checked on me in months. The door creaked open, and his large frame filled the doorway. Despite his size, he moved gently, like someone trying not to spook a stray cat. He sat down on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping under his weight. He didn't ask questions or tell me to talk. He just sat with me, quiet, solid, present. And somehow, the silence wasn't scary. It reminded me of nights with my mom when she'd sit beside me until I fell asleep, no words needed. Something inside me cracked. A tear rolled down my cheek, landing silently on the pillow. I didn't wipe it away. Soon another followed. In the dim light, his tattooed arms looked like stories I hadn't learned yet. His hands, scarred and rough from whatever life he'd lived before, rested quietly on his knees. Those hands had given me food, shelter, and something I hadn't dared hope for. A chance. More tears came, and I didn't fight them. For the first time in months, I let the grief wash over me, knowing I wasn't facing it alone. Morning sunlight spilled through the kitchen window, warming the table where I sat across from Jack. My hands cradled a mug of steaming coffee, its rich smell filling the room. A plate of scrambled eggs, half eaten, sat in front of me. For once, my stomach wasn't twisted up with hunger. Jack, sitting across from me, looked almost too big for the small wooden chair. His leather vest hung over the back of it, leaving his tattooed arms bare. Some of the ink was crisp and detailed. Other pieces looked like they'd been done by somebody with a shaky hand. Prison tats, I thought before I caught myself. "You probably got questions," Jack said, voice rough but calm. "About me. About why any of this." He sipped his coffee, watching me over the rim. I nodded a little, staring into my mug. The brown liquid swirled slowly, like it had answers I didn't know how to ask for. "I wasn't always like this," he said, setting his mug down. 20 years ago, I was running with the Hells Angels. Mean as they came. He rolled up his sleeve, revealing a tattoo partly covered, still showing the unmistakable death as head symbol. My eyes widened, though I said nothing. Violence, drugs, all of it, he admitted. I was buried neck deep in the mess. Jack's eyes drifted off for a moment, like he was staring at ghosts only he could see. "Back then," he said quietly, "I thought I was untouchable. Thought I was living the dream. But truth is, I was just as lost as any kid out there." The kitchen clock ticked steadily behind us, filling the spaces his silence left behind. Outside the window, I could hear the other teens in the backyard, their voices soft and distant. "So what changed?" I asked, barely able to get the words out. Jack's hard features softened. "Met a kid. Reminded me of myself at that age. Angry, scared, fighting the whole damn world even though I didn't know what I was fighting for. He let out a slow breath and ran a hand through his graying hair. Found him behind a gas station one winter. Half frozen. Couldn't just walk away. My fingers tightened around my mug. His story felt too close to mine. Too familiar. That kid, he went on, leaning his elbows on the table, showed me something I'd forgotten existed. He looked straight at me. Hope. He shrugged a little, but there was weight behind it. Made me start thinking about all the wrong I'd done. Figured maybe it was time to try putting some good back into the world. So you just left? I asked, letting my doubts slip into my voice. Nothing in my life had ever been that simple. Jack chuckled, but the sound held no humor. Nothing just about it. Took years. Lost friends. Made enemies. But eventually, yeah, I walked away. He swept his hand around the kitchen. Started this instead. Wasn't official at first. Word got around. Kids showed up. Needed a place. Needed someone who understood. I studied his face the way I'd learned to study strangers for danger, for lies. But Jack's eyes didn't dodge mine. They didn't shift or darken. They stayed steady, clear, honest. So why tell me all that? I asked. He rested a hand on the table. Because sometimes knowing somebody else survived their darkness makes it easier to believe you can survive yours too. He stood up, the chair scraping across the floor. You don't have to trust me right away. Hell, if I were you, I wouldn't. But you're safe here, Lily. That's what matters for now. I watched him move to the sink, rinsing his empty mug. His words hung in the air between us, heavy and strange. Part of me wanted to bolt. Running was the only thing I'd been good at these last few years. But another part, the part one thought I'd buried with my mother, whispered softly that maybe I could trust this man who'd crawled out of his own darkness. For the first time in forever, I felt the hard armor around my heart crack just a little. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen window a few mornings later as I wiped down the counter. 3 days had passed since I'd first walked into Jack's house, and the place was starting to feel different. Not home, not yet, but something close enough that it scared me. Hey, you missed a spot, Tommy called out, pointing at a crumb I'd somehow overlooked. He was 15 with messy brown hair and a crooked grin that showed up more often now. I rolled my eyes and scrubbed the corner. Better. He nodded and flicked me a dish towel. Jack kept the house running on routine. Everyone had chores, everyone cooked, everyone pitched in. Nothing fancy, just order, and somehow it worked. Every morning we gathered for breakfast, and Jack passed out tasks like a foreman with a heart. After lunch one day, he dropped a worn-out notebook on the kitchen table. Budget lesson time. I slid into the chair beside him, watching his big tattooed hands move carefully across the page as he wrote. First rule of surviving in this world, he said, is learning how to handle your money. He showed me how to track expenses, how to separate needs from wants, how to stretch a dollar when life didn't give you many. Later that afternoon, he taught me to cook. His patience never slipped, even when I burned the eggs or poured too much salt into the soup. Everyone starts somewhere, he'd say with that steady calm of his, guiding my hand on the knife or adjusting the stove flame. Tommy, Sarah, Marcus, all of them slowly started pulling me into their conversations. We talked during dinner, shared bits of our pasts, our fears, our tiny dreams. Jack listened quietly to every word, stepping in only when someone asked for advice. By the 4th day, I felt brave enough to volunteer for dinner. I wanted to make my mom's pasta sauce, one of the few memories untouched by pain. My hands trembled as I chopped onions and crushed garlic, hearing her voice in my mind. Cooking is just love made visible. The kitchen filled with the rich smell of tomatoes and herbs as the sauce simmered. The kids drifted in like moths to a porch light, and even Jack raised an eyebrow as he passed. At dinner, everyone gathered around the table. House rule. The chairs scraped the floor as they sat, and my breath caught in my throat as Jack twirled a forkful of pasta. He took a bite. His eyes widened slightly, and then a warm smile spread across his face. This is something special, Lily. The others dug in, and soon the table filled with murmurs of approval and requests for seconds. Heat bloomed in my chest, not from pride, but from something deeper. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving. I was contributing. I was part of something. Jack lifted his glass of water and nodded toward me. To Lily. The others followed, raising their glasses too. A simple gesture, but it felt like the world shifted under my feet. Sitting there at that worn wooden table with 4 other broken people trying to heal, I felt something I never expected to feel again. I felt like I belonged. Later that afternoon, the sun spilled into the living room, throwing long shadows across the carpet. I sat cross-legged on the couch, helping one of the younger girls with her math homework. The house hummed with that easy rhythm we'd all fallen into. Cooking, cleaning, talking, existing together without fear. From the kitchen, Jack hummed quietly as he worked on dinner. The smell of garlic and tomato sauce drifted through the house like a warm blanket. It feels like home, I thought. Real home. 3 sharp knocks at the front door sliced straight through the peaceful rhythm of the house. Jack wiped his hands on a dish towel and headed toward the entryway. I watched from the kitchen as he pulled the door open, and 2 police officers stood on the porch. One was tall with a stiff, serious expression. The other stayed just behind her, quieter, almost unsure of his role. "Mr. Duca?" the tall officer asked, her badge catching a flash of sunlight. "I'm Officer Harris, and this is Officer Martinez. We need to speak with you about some concerns brought to our attention." Jack's shoulders tightened, even though his voice stayed calm. "Of course. Would you like to come in?" The officers exchanged a look before stepping inside. My stomach twisted into a tight knot as Officer Harris scanned the room, taking in the teens scattered around doing homework, watching TV, living a life that felt normal for once. "Mr. Duca," she said, her tone clipped and official, "we've received reports about your program. Several citizens are concerned that you're housing minors without proper documentation or oversight." Jack clasped his hands behind his back, his posture steady. "I understand the concern, officers. These kids needed help, and I offered a safe place. Everything here is above board." "Are you licensed to run a youth shelter?" Officer Martinez asked. "This isn't a shelter," Jack explained. "I'm operating as a temporary guardian while we work with social services to find permanent placements. I have all the paperwork." He walked over to the desk in the corner and pulled out a thick folder. My palms grew sweaty. I couldn't stop thinking about everything he'd told us about his past with the Hells Angels. Would the officers look past that? Or was this the moment everything fell apart? "Your history is a concern, Mr. Duca," Officer Harris said as she flipped through the papers. "Your association with the Hells Angels. That was years ago." Jack cut in, firm but respectful. "I've changed my life. These kids need someone who's been where they are. Someone who understands." The whole room had gone quiet. Every teen watched the officers with wide, worried eyes. I could practically feel the tension, like the air before a lightning strike. Officer Harris closed the folder and handed it back. "We'll need to verify all of this. Expect follow-up visits from Child Protective Services. If anything is missing or inconsistent." She didn't bother finishing the sentence. "I understand," Jack said. "You're welcome to check everything. Their safety is my priority." The officers asked a few more questions before leaving, but their presence lingered like a heavy weight long after the front door closed. Jack stood at the window, watching their patrol car disappear down the street. His shoulders, usually so strong and steady, seemed to sag. I approached him slowly. "Jack, are we going to be okay?" He turned, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Everything's gonna be fine, kid. We just gotta weather the storm." But I saw the fear behind his expression. It matched the tight, cold worry growing inside my own chest. For the first time, the house, the safe haven he'd built, felt shaky, like waves were creeping closer to its walls. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the living room windows as Jack gathered us all in the common area. His voice was steady, but his shoulders carried the weight of the night before. "Listen up, everyone," he said, rubbing a hand through his graying hair. I'd learned that gesture. Stress. "We need to talk about what happened yesterday." The room went still. Marcus, sitting cross-legged on the floor, pulled his knees in tight. Sarah gripped the couch cushion like someone might pull it away from her. "Are they going to shut us down?" someone finally asked. Jack shook his head slowly. "Not right now, but we're under scrutiny. They want to make sure everything here checks out." He paced a few steps, his boots thudding softly on the carpet. "That means we stay on our best behavior. No staying out late. No trouble at school. Nothing that draws attention." I watched his face as he spoke. Every line, every crease more pronounced than usual. His fingers drifted to the faded tattoo on his forearm, The mark of a life he'd walked away from, but one that still threatened to drag this place down. What exactly are they worried about? I asked. Jack sat back in his favorite armchair, letting out a slow exhale. Mainly my past. Ex-biker taking in troubled kids? Doesn't look great on paper. He tried for a smile, but it didn't hold. They want certifications, licenses, things we've been operating without while we try to get this place running. A wave of worried whispers rippled through the room. These kids like me, had nowhere else to go. The idea of losing this home, this fragile little community, made my stomach churn. I looked at Jack's tired expression and thought about how he'd found me outside that diner. Cold, starving, hopeless. He gave me warmth, food, and something I didn't think I'd ever feel again, safety. I couldn't let the place shut down. I stood up, clearing my throat, even though nerves fluttered in my chest. What if we showed them? I said. Jack raised an eyebrow. Showed them what? What this place really is. My voice wavered but held. We could host something, a community event. Let people see what you do here. Let them meet us. Let them see how much this house matters. Sarah raised her hand timidly. I could help cook, she whispered, cheeks pink. Marcus nodded. And I could talk about being back in school. Excitement flickered in the room, replacing the earlier fear like a spark catching on dry wood. Jack listened to every idea, his face thoughtful. Finally, he shook his head a little. It's risky, he said quietly. Putting ourselves out there. If it doesn't work. It will, I said, meeting his eyes. It has to. You took a chance on all of us, I said quietly. Maybe now it's time to let other people take a chance on you. The room went still. Jack stared at me for a long moment, like he was turning my words over in his mind. Finally, he nodded, slow, heavy but real. All right, he said, his voice rougher than usual. We'll try it. But we've only got a week to pull this together, so we plan smart. A spark of hope lit in my chest. Around me, the other teens were already firing off ideas, the energy in the room shifting from fear to determination. For the first time since the police visit, Jack straightened his shoulders, and a real smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. That afternoon, Jack called everyone into the living room. Sunlight spilled through the windows, casting long shadows across the carpet. 6 teenagers sat in a circle, some on the couch, others on the floor. I perched on the armchair, notebook already open across my lap. All right, kids, Jack said, his voice deep and steady. If we're going to survive this, we need to show the community what we really do here. He ran a hand through his graying hair, the motion pulling up his t-shirt sleeve and exposing some of his old tattoos. This isn't just about keeping the lights on. It's about helping the next kid who shows up at our door needing a chance. Tommy, lanky, 15, and always curious, raised his hand. So what exactly are we doing? A fundraiser, I said before I could lose my courage. Invite the neighborhood, maybe some local businesses. My voice grew stronger with every word. Show them we're not just troubled kids. Show them we're people trying to build better lives. Jack's eyes softened, pride warming his expression. That's exactly what I was thinking, Lily. We need to let folks see the real us, not the rumors. Sarah, sitting cross-legged with her red hair tucked under her chin, whispered, But what if no one comes? They'll come, Jack said gently. We just need to plan this right. And everyone here's going to have a job. The next hour flew by. Marcus and Tommy were put in charge of setting up tables and chairs outside. Sarah and Rachel volunteered to make posters and flyers. Mike, who'd been taking culinary classes, offered to handle the food. When the topic of speakers came up, Jack looked straight at me. Lily, would you be willing to share your story? People need to hear from somebody who's lived it. My heart thundered in my chest. Speaking in front of strangers? My palms instantly started sweating. But I also knew how much this place meant, not just to me, but to all of us. Yes, I said, surprising even myself. I'll do it. You sure? Jack asked softly. It's not easy, putting yourself out there like that. I straightened my shoulders. I'm sure. If my story helps keep this place open, I want to tell it. The whole room shifted then, everyone diving into work with renewed purpose. Sarah and Rachel sprawled out across the floor, markers and posters everywhere. Marcus and Tommy ran outside with tape measures. Mike sat at the kitchen table scribbling menu ideas. I just sat there and watched for a moment, my chest filling with something huge and warm. A few weeks ago, I'd been invisible, hungry, freezing, alone. Now here I was, part of a team, a family, a group of broken kids trying to piece something good together. Jack sat beside me, quiet but steady. "You know what makes this place special?" he asked softly. I looked around, the focus on everyone's faces, the way they worked together like they mattered. "What?" I asked. "It's not just the roof," he said. "It's purpose. Look at them." He gestured toward the others. "They're not just surviving anymore. They're actually living for something." My eyes stung, but for once, it wasn't from sadness. I felt needed, important, like my existence mattered in a way it never had before. I opened my notebook and started writing ideas for my speech. For the first time in a long time, I felt hope. The community center buzzed with nervous excitement the night of the fundraiser. From the little window in the back room, I watched the crowd grow larger and larger. My hands trembled as I smoothed the wrinkled paper of my speech. My stomach twisted into 100 knots. "You've got this," I whispered to myself, though my voice sounded far away. I caught sight of my reflection in a small mirror. The girl staring back looked different, not the starving kid digging through dumpsters. My cheeks had some color now. My eyes looked clearer, and the simple blue dress Jack had bought me made me look almost like a normal 16-year-old. Someone tested the microphone on stage, sending a sharp squeal through the room that made me jump. The coordinator began the program with a cheerful welcome. I peeked through the curtain one last time. The seats were full. Business owners, teachers, neighbors, people curious about who we were and what Jack was doing. Some even stood along the walls. In the front row, Jack sat in a cleaned-up version of his usual outfit. Leather jacket polished, a collared shirt underneath. He still looked slightly uncomfortable, like formal clothes didn't quite know how to sit on him. But when our eyes met, he gave me a nod, steady, encouraging. "And now," the coordinator announced, "we have a special speaker. Lily Harper would like to share her story." My legs felt like they were made of concrete as I walked to the podium. The lights were too bright, the silence too heavy. My hands shook so badly, I almost dropped my speech onto the floor. I took a breath, and another. Then I remembered Jack's words earlier. "Just speak from your heart, kid. That's all anyone needs to hear." 5 days, I began, my voice cracking. I swallowed hard and tried again. 5 days without food. That's where my story with Jack began. The room quieted. Every face seemed to turn toward me. Before that, I continued. I had a home, a mother who loved me. My voice trembled, but I didn't stop. After cancer took my mom, my dad just disappeared into drugs. And once I lost him too, the streets became the only home I had left. Hunger wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was a constant companion, always nipping at my heels. I looked straight at Jack now, letting his steady presence hold me together. But then this man, everyone called him the bear, found me. I said. He could have kept walking, just like everybody else had. But instead, he said 4 words that changed everything. I paused, my voice catching. "Pack your things. You're coming with me." I watched the crowd lean in. A woman in the 3rd row dabbed at her eyes. A businessman who'd looked half asleep earlier now sat forward, phone forgotten in his lap. "Jack's program isn't just about a roof," I continued, my voice growing stronger with every word. "It's about giving us dignity again, giving us hope, a future." He showed me that my past doesn't have to be the thing that defines me, that I'm still worth a second chance. I scanned the room and saw the shift happening. Skepticism melting into empathy, judgment turning into understanding. It felt like a wave of compassion sweeping over the entire crowd. The next morning, sunlight poured through the kitchen windows as I stood beside Jack flipping pancakes. The house buzzed with a new kind of energy, optimistic, excited, alive. The fundraiser had been a success. Local newspapers had covered it. Donations were already coming in. "I think we really did it," I said, flipping a pancake with a confidence I didn't even recognize as my own. Jack smiled, a real one that reached his eyes. "You were incredible up there, kid. You showed them what this place really is." But the peaceful morning shattered when heavy knocks pounded against the front door. Jack froze. His whole expression shifted. As he walked toward the door, I slipped closer to the window. 3 police cars sat out front, lights flashing. A stern-faced officer held up paperwork. "Jack Duca, we have a warrant to inspect and shut down this facility." The color drained from Jack's face. "On what grounds?" he asked. "We've received multiple reports about your history with the Hells Angels," another officer said. stepping inside without waiting for permission. Running an unauthorized youth program with your background raises significant concerns. Behind them, more officers filed in, clipboards, cameras, the cold look of people who'd already made up their minds. The kids gathered in the living room, their expressions a mix of fear and disbelief. "This is wrong," Jack said, voice tight. "These kids have nowhere else to go. You know damn well we're helping them." "That's for the proper authorities to determine," the lead officer replied without emotion. "Everyone needs to pack essential items. You need to clear out within the hour." My world began to collapse around me. Officers moved through the house documenting everything, treating it like a crime scene instead of a safe haven. The other teens scrambled to collect their belongings, some crying, others moving like ghosts, too stunned to react. Jack stood in the middle of it all, shoulders slumped, looking older than I'd ever seen him. His large frame seemed to shrink under the weight of it. "I'm sorry," he whispered, though nobody had blamed him. I grabbed my backpack, the same one I'd had when Jack found me outside that diner. It felt heavier than ever. Instead of just clothes and scraps of memories, it carried heartbreak now. Outside, the officers pushed us onto the front lawn. A line of social workers waited, ready to separate us. The younger kids would be taken into custody. I was 16, old enough that I knew exactly where I'd end up. Back on the streets, the officer snapped a heavy padlock onto the front door. The metallic click echoed down the quiet street like a final note of defeat. Yellow police tape stretched across the doorway, slicing through everything we'd built. "This isn't right," I said, my voice breaking. "Not after everything we showed them last night." But Jack couldn't even look at me. He just stood there with his arms hanging useless at his sides, the fight drained out of him. The man who'd seemed unstoppable now looked shattered. One by one, the teens were led to waiting vehicles. Some sobbing, some angry, all of us broken. I stood frozen, staring at the house that had been the first real home I'd had since I was a little girl. The morning sun felt colder than it should have, and I knew the pancakes still sitting on the counter would never be eaten. The lead officer walked over one last time. "Mr. Duca, you'll be hearing from Family Services. I suggest you find yourself a good lawyer." My feet felt heavy as I walked down the front steps, the padlock glinting behind me like a cruel joke. My worn backpack pulled at my shoulders. I could feel Jack standing somewhere behind me, but I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Not with the defeat hanging in the air like smoke. The other kids were already gone. The street looked endless again, just like the day Jack found me. My throat tightened. My eyes burned. But I blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall. "Lily." Jack's voice called out, rough, unsure. But he didn't say anything else. What could he say? The system had won. His past had finally caught up with him, and now all of us were paying for it. I started walking, my sneakers dragging across the concrete. The familiar weight of hopelessness settled over me like a blanket I never wanted to feel again. All the memories, the laughter in the kitchen, the late-night talks, the feeling of belonging, they all seemed to mock me now, like I'd never deserved them in the first place. By the time I reached the corner of the street, the reality of everything crashed into me like a wave. I had nowhere to go. Again, the same streets that had nearly swallowed me once were standing there like a hungry mouth, waiting to drag me back in. My stomach twisted at the thought of dumpster diving again, of curling up in doorways, of feeling invisible. The sun was setting, painting the sky in cruel streaks of orange and pink, too beautiful for how broken I felt inside. I walked without direction, slipping deeper into the growing shadows, passing shops closing for the night and families heading home for dinner. Their world kept turning. Mine had just stopped. I found myself near the diner where Jack had first found me, but I couldn't even look at it. The memory hurt too much. Instead, I wandered into a small park and sat on a bench, pulling my thin jacket tight around me as the air cooled. A couple walked by, holding hands, casting me the kind of look people save for stray animals or trouble waiting to happen. I was invisible again, or worse, someone to avoid. As night settled in, exhaustion pulled at me. I found a small sheltered patch behind some bushes, far from the main path. I curled up on the cold ground and used my backpack as a pillow. I'd done this 100 times before, but tonight felt different. This time, I knew exactly what I was missing. I thought of Jack, probably still standing in front of that locked house, trying to figure out what to do next. I pictured the other kids, scattered like leaves in a storm. The fundraiser had felt so hopeful, and yet it still wasn't enough to erase the prejudice stamped onto Jack's past. Sleep wouldn't come. Every noise, footsteps, wind in the leaves, distant sirens, made my muscles tense. The cold ground pressed into my bones, nothing like the soft bed I'd gotten used to at Jack's place. My stomach growled painfully. By the time the sky began to lighten through the branches, I knew for sure I was back at the beginning. Alone, homeless, but something inside me had changed. I knew now what it felt like to belong, and that made being back on the street cut even deeper. As the sun rose higher, I walked with new purpose, clutching my worn backpack tight against my side. I'd been awake all night, thinking about Jack and the others, about the way the police padlocked the only safe place we had. No, I whispered to myself, I won't let it end like this. The local news station towered over the sidewalk, all glass and steel. I swallowed hard as I walked toward the entrance, smoothing down my wrinkled shirt before pushing through the revolving doors. Inside, the lobby buzzed with people in suits, moving fast and not bothering to look twice at a girl like me. The receptionist glanced up when I stepped to the desk. "Can I help you?" she asked, sounding polite but distant. I need to talk to someone about a story. Something important." "Do you have an appointment?" "No," but my voice cracked. I took a deep breath. "But I have something people need to hear. It's about homeless teens, and a man who's trying to save us." She stared at me for a moment, then picked up the phone. After a quiet conversation, she pointed to a row of chairs. "Sarah Martinez will be down in a few minutes. Please have a seat." I sat, legs bouncing uncontrollably, watching the clock tick until a woman in her 30s approached with a notebook in hand. "I'm Sarah," she said gently. "Tell me what brought you here." And the words spilled out of me like a dam breaking. I told her everything. Living on the streets, Jack finding me outside the diner, the way he took us in, taught us, fed us, believed in us. I told her how we worked, how we grew, how he gave all of us hope. I told her about the fundraiser and how the police shut everything down anyway. Sarah took notes nonstop, her face softening with every detail. "This is compelling," she said. "Lily, would you be willing to go on camera and share your story?" I hesitated only a second. Then I nodded. Yes, people need to know who Jack really is. He's not just some ex-biker. He's saving lives. The next few hours flew by. Sarah arranged a full interview, helped me gather my thoughts, even found me a clean shirt to wear. Soon I was standing under bright studio lights, facing the camera. 5 days without food. I began, steady and strong. That's where I was when Jack found me. People walked past me every day like I was invisible. But he saw me. He saw all of us, the forgotten kids, the ones society pretends aren't there. I felt something in me harden, not from anger, but from purpose. I told them about Jack's patience, his strength, his belief that broken people still deserved a chance to be whole again. I explained that his program wasn't just shelter, it was dignity, community, family. And the police think shutting down his program is protecting us, I said directly into the camera. But they're wrong. They're sending us back to hunger, to fear, to hopelessness. Jack Duca is the only person who's ever fought for us. Now it's our turn to fight for him. When the interview ended, Sarah squeezed my hand. "That was powerful," she said. "We're airing this tonight. People are going to hear you." Walking out of the studio, I felt different, taller somehow. The quiet girl who used to hide behind dumpsters now had a voice, and I wasn't afraid to use it. The next morning, long shadows stretched across the sidewalk outside a local coffee shop. I stood there watching people read the newspaper, my heart skipping every time someone paused at the front page headline. "Former Hell's Angel gives homeless teens second chance at life." Inside, the cafe owner, Mrs. Peterson, spotted me and waved. "Lily, honey," she said warmly. "Come here." Her voice, softer than I expected, washed over me like sunlight. "I've been thinking about that article," Mrs. Peterson said, her eyes softening. "And I want to help. I could use someone like you part-time. And maybe we could start a little program here. Teach other kids job skills." My hands trembled as I accepted the offer. I could barely speak. This moment, felt like the start of something new, something real. All day, the cheap little phone the church had given me kept buzzing with messages of support. The local hardware store offered to help repair Jack's house. A lawyer reached out, volunteering to guide Jack through every legal requirement needed to run a proper youth program. I can't believe this is happening, Jack said later that afternoon. He sat at his kitchen table. Well, the community center's table for now, surrounded by stacks of papers, permits, business cards, and handwritten notes from people wanting to help. His eyes were red from lack of sleep, but there was a spark in them I hadn't seen in weeks. You did this, kid, he said, shaking his head in awe. You didn't give up. The community center had opened its doors to all of us, offering temporary housing while volunteers worked to bring the old house fully up to code. Contractors showed up with trucks of supplies. Women from a local church brought home-cooked meals to feed everyone. We're doing this right this time, Jack said firmly as he reviewed another stack of documents with the lawyer. Everything by the book. No shadows. No hiding. Not anymore. The lawyer nodded, explaining how we could set up a real nonprofit organization, clear, legal, protected. Day after day, more people stepped forward. A retired teacher volunteered to tutor the teens. A local doctor offered free medical checkups. Even the police chief came by to shake Jack's hand and apologize. Sometimes, he said, we forget everyone deserves a second chance. What you're doing here, Mr. Duca, it matters. Weeks passed in a blur of inspections, repairs, and planning. And finally, the day came. The house stood transformed. Not just the building, fresh paint, repaired shutters, new windows, but what it represented. It was no longer a hidden refuge. It was now a fully recognized, fully legal youth home backed by an entire community. Duca Youth Haven. Everyone deserves a second chance. The letters glowed in the morning light from the new sign above the door. I stood beside Jack on the porch, watching volunteers unload donated furniture and supplies. The teens who had once been scattered returned with relieved smiles, carrying their bags back inside. I never thought I'd see this day, Jack said quietly. His voice cracked just a little. He placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. When I took in that first kid, I was just doing what felt right. But this is more than I ever imagined. I leaned against him, watching more people arrive with boxes and donations. We did it, I whispered, almost afraid to say it out loud. We really did it. The old house that once sheltered us in secret had become a symbol, proof of what an entire community could accomplish when they believed in second chances. This wasn't just Jack's mission anymore. It was the town's promise to every forgotten kid who needed a place to land. The morning sun cast a warm glow over the freshly painted walls. Where peeling paint once clung to rotting wood, bright white boards and navy trim now welcomed every visitor. The new sign shone proudly near the entrance. Duca Youth Haven. Everyone deserves a second chance. Jack stood on the porch leaning against one of the new support posts. His weathered face softened into a smile as he watched a small group gather out front. The transformation of the house mirrored his own. Rough edges softened, purpose renewed. I walked up the driveway leading 3 new teens behind me. They clutched backpacks and duffel bags, their eyes darting around nervously. I recognized that look, the blend of fear, hope, and disbelief. One girl, maybe 14, held her bag so tightly her knuckles were white. Welcome to your new home, I said with a warm smile. I'd practiced those words so many times, wanting them to come out just right. I know this feels scary. I know. But this place, it changes lives. It changed mine. Inside the entrance hall hung the framed newspaper article about Jack's program. Beneath it sat stacks of letters and donations from businesses and families all over town, a wall of proof that people cared. The living room buzzed with energy. Teens sat on donated couches doing homework. Laughter drifted from the kitchen along with the smell of fresh cookies. Mrs. Martinez from the bakery now came every week to teach cooking classes. See that man? I said, nodding to Jack. The newcomers stared at him, big, tattooed, built like a mountain. Don't let the size fool you, I said with a grin. He looks like a grizzly bear, but he's got the biggest heart of anyone I've ever known. Jack stepped forward, his boots creaking on the porch. Rules are simple, he said. Be honest, be respectful, and be ready to help each other. Everything else, we figure out together. The youngest girl looked up at him. Really? That's it. Jack smiled. That's it. Everyone here has a story, and everybody gets a fresh start. I led them inside, showing them the rooms, the kitchen, the gathering space. I knew every corner like the back of my hand. I'd come a long, long way from the starving girl curled behind a dumpster. Now I walked tall, confident, hopeful. The new kids followed behind me, their shoulders slowly relaxing as they took in the warmth and safety of their new home. Other teens waved hello, offering small smiles of understanding. And in that moment, watching them cross the doorway, I realized something huge. I wasn't just someone Jack saved. I was part of saving others, too. Every kid who stepped through that front door had been new once. Every one of them carried their own weight, their own scars, their own history. I knew that feeling all too well. Jack watched from the doorway with his arms crossed over his chest, a proud smile softening his rugged features. When our eyes met, I couldn't help smiling back. I remembered my own first day, the fear, the uncertainty, and now here I was, the one offering hope to someone else. A circle completed by a simple act of kindness outside a diner. "Your rooms are this way," I said, gesturing down the hallway. "The first night is always the hardest, but it gets easier. I promise." My voice was steady. My steps were sure. Jack stayed in the doorway behind us, watching the young woman he'd once found on the streets, now guiding others toward the light he'd given her. I ran my hand along the freshly painted hallway wall, feeling the smooth surface beneath my fingertips. The house smelled like coffee and pancakes, so different from the cold sidewalks where I'd once tried to survive. Sunlight poured in through the windows, casting warm shapes on the wood floor. When I paused in the kitchen doorway, Jack was already at the stove cooking breakfast for the newest arrivals. He moved with practiced ease, flipping pancakes, pouring orange juice, his tattoos peeking from under his rolled sleeves. Those tattoos told a story of a past that somehow, against all odds, led him to this moment. "Need any help?" I asked. He looked up, smiling. "I've got it covered, kid, but you can set the table if you want." I laid out plates and silverware, thinking about how different everything felt now. This wasn't just a temporary shelter anymore. It was a real home, a place with proper funding, legal structure, community support. Local businesses donated food, supplies, volunteers came in weekly for tutoring and job training. "Sometimes I have to pinch myself," I said, setting down the last fork, "just to make sure all of this is real." Jack turned off the stove and leaned against the counter. "I know the feeling. When those cops showed up with that warrant, I really thought it was over. But we didn't give up," I said firmly. "We couldn't." Jack nodded. "No, we couldn't. You know, when I first started this, I thought maybe helping a few kids would make up for some of the things in my past. But it's become so much more than that." I sat at the table, and he joined me. Outside, a group of younger teens played basketball in the driveway. Their laughter drifted through the open window, a sound that still felt like magic. "We've got 10 kids now," I said proudly. "And 3 more coming next week." Jack let out a low whistle. "It's growing faster than I ever imagined. We'll need more staff soon." "I've been thinking about that," I said, sitting up straighter. "Maybe some of us who've been here longer, like me, could mentor the new ones. We know what it's like to feel lost." Jack's eyes crinkled with approval. "That's exactly what I was thinking. You've come a long way from that girl I found outside the diner." Warmth spread through my chest. "We all have stories," I said softly. "And they're not over yet." "No," Jack agreed, glancing around the kitchen at the stocked pantry and the schedule board filled with activities. "This is just the beginning. These kids need more than shelter. They need someone to believe in them, to show them there's a better way. Like you did for me," I said. "Like we're doing for them," Jack corrected gently. "Together," I smiled, feeling the weight and truth of that word, together. We weren't just running a program. We were building a family, one kid at a time. The work wasn't easy and never would be, but we were ready for whatever came next. Kids filtered into the kitchen, drawn by the smell of breakfast and the promise of another safe day. I moved across the room with quiet confidence, helping Marcus with homework, listening to Jennifer talk about her job interview, reminding Tommy to take his medication. Somehow, without even noticing, I'd stepped into a leadership role. Later, during group session, I sat beside Jack as he led the discussion. When Diego, a newer kid, struggled to open up, I leaned forward gently. "It's okay to be scared," I told him. "We've all been there. This house, these people, they become your family if you let them. And family means you don't have to carry everything alone." Around the circle, the others nodded. They trusted me because they'd seen my journey. They knew where I'd come from. They knew I understood. And Jack saw it too. How far I'd come, how much I cared, how much I was becoming someone the others could rely on. I wasn't just proof that change was possible. I was helping make that change for others. That afternoon, while I was sorting donations in the storage room, I noticed Jack leaning in the doorway. "Got a minute?" he asked, motioning toward his office. I wiped my hands on my jeans and followed him down the hallway, past the wall of framed photos. Every kid who'd ever come through our doors, smiling, hopeful. My own picture was up there now, right beside a newspaper clipping from the day we fought to keep the house open. I still couldn't believe that was me. Jack's office wasn't big, but it was cozy, lived in. The leather chair behind his desk had seen better days, and the walls were covered with certificates, training courses, counseling workshops, CPR classes. The newest frame held his official youth counselor certification, something he'd worked his tail off to get after the trouble with the authorities. "Take a seat," he said, settling into his chair. His expression looked serious, but there was excitement underneath. "I've been watching you these past few weeks, Lily," he began. "The way you handle the new kids. The way you've stepped up around here." He paused, his eyes warm with pride. "You've got a gift for this kind of work." Heat crept into my cheeks. "I just want to help them the way you helped me. That's exactly why I wanted to talk." He leaned forward, sliding a folder toward me. "Paperwork, charts, maps. This program is growing faster than we ever expected. We're getting more requests than this one house can handle. I'm thinking about expanding, opening a second location across town." I stared at him, shock and excitement buzzing through me. He smiled like he already knew what I was thinking. "But I can't do it alone. I need someone who understands these kids from the inside out. Someone they can look up to." My heart skipped. I wasn't sure what to say, but deep down, I already knew my answer. The community center was alive with noise by the time we arrived to set up for our celebration event. Volunteers rushed in and out, hanging colorful banners, arranging tables stacked with cookies and coffee, laughing as they worked. The smell of fresh pastries drifted through the air, and it brought me right back to that life-changing moment outside the diner when Jack found me starving and alone. "Need help with those?" Jack's voice rumbled behind me. He wasn't wearing his usual leather jacket today. Instead, he had on a neat button-up shirt, but the tattoos still peeked out from under his sleeves, reminders of the road he'd taken to get here. "I've got it," I said, lining up the last row of chairs. "Can you believe how many people are coming?" Jack chuckled. "The mayor, business owners, even that police chief who gave us hell in the beginning." He shook his head. "Things sure have changed." I looked out at the room filling with volunteers. Some were former residents of Jack's program. Kids who once felt broken, now standing tall, working jobs, studying again, holding their heads high. You couldn't buy that kind of dignity. You had to earn it. "Remember when I could barely look anyone in the eye?" I asked softly, thinking back to my first shaky days in the house. Jack's voice gentled. "Look at you now. Running workshops, mentoring kids, speaking at schools. You're not that same girl anymore." The doors opened, and people streamed in. Neighbors, teachers, business owners, friends. Each one was a piece of the safety net that held us up. When I stepped to the podium, I wasn't the trembling girl I'd been months earlier. My voice was steady. "Sure. When I first came here, I was hungry, alone, and I'd pretty much lost all hope." I glanced at Jack. His eyes were already wet. But one person's kindness changed everything. I shared our successes. The boy who'd graduated with honors, the girl reunited with her family, the teen who discovered her talent for art and was now teaching others. With every story, I saw people nodding, smiling, wiping away tears. After the speeches, the room hummed with conversation. Volunteers swapped ideas, kids shared their progress, and adults made plans to support our growing program. "We've got 5 more businesses signing on for apprenticeships," Jack said proudly, "and the mayor's promising funding for the second house." My heart surged with joy. This wasn't just a gathering. It was proof, a living reminder, that second chances are real. A young girl, maybe 12, tugged at my sleeve. Her eyes sparkled with admiration. "I want to help," she said shyly. "I want to do what you do." I knelt so we were eye to eye. I remembered being her age, feeling small but wanting so badly to make a difference. "You already are," I told her gently. "Just by caring, you're helping. That's where it all begins." As laughter and conversation echoed around the room, something settled deep inside me, a sense of belonging, of purpose. Like I'd finally stepped into the life I was meant to live. The next morning, long shadows stretched across the parking lot as Jack loaded the last of the camping gear into the old van. I helped Marcus, Sarah, and Devin pack their backpacks. None of them had ever left the city before, and they were buzzing with anticipation. "Everyone ready?" Jack asked, tugging his leather jacket tighter against the chilly morning air. "Born ready," Devin yelled, practically bouncing in place. He was only 15, full of energy from the moment he woke up. I climbed into the passenger seat, smiling at him. "Just wait until you see the mountains," I said. "They make you feel small, but in the best way." The van rumbled to life. As we pulled away, buildings faded into suburbs, and suburbs gave way to wide stretches of open country. The teens pressed their faces to the windows. Sarah, the quietest of the three, pointed at every horse, every cow, every rolling field. "I've only seen those in pictures," she whispered in awe. And in that moment, watching her eyes grow wide with wonder, I realized just how far we'd all come. Not just from the streets, but from the darkness that once defined us. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were learning how to live. Marcus, who'd spent 3 long years on the streets before Jack took him in, kept shaking his head in disbelief as we drove. "Man," he said, staring out the window, "I never thought I'd get to do something like this." The highway stretched out in front of us like a long ribbon of possibility. Jack told stories about his first road trip, wrong turns, blown tires, and ridiculous choices he made when he was young. We all laughed until our stomachs hurt. Out here, away from the daily responsibilities, he looked lighter, happier. We stopped at a tiny roadside diner for lunch, the kind of place where the waitress calls everyone honey and sneaks extra fries onto the plates without charging. Devin tried chocolate pie for the first time, and the way his face lit up, you'd think he'd discovered treasure. As the road wound higher into the mountains, the air grew crisp and sharp. Pine trees lined the road like giants reaching toward the sky. When we finally pulled into the campsite, Sarah stepped out of the van and froze. "This is real," she whispered, staring out at the valley below. "This is actually real?" Jack showed the kids how to set up tents, while I helped teach them how to build a safe campfire. They soaked up every lesson like sponges, working together like they'd been doing this their whole lives. When the sun dipped behind the mountain peaks, streaking the sky in orange and pink, we gathered around the crackling fire. Jack appeared with marshmallows, chocolate, and graham crackers, and suddenly everyone looked like little kids again. "I've got a story for you," he said, his voice mixing with the sound of crickets and faraway owls. He told them about his first camping trip after leaving the Hells Angels, how waking up under the stars helped him figure out the man he wanted to become. Marcus roasted his marshmallow slowly. "It's like out here, none of the bad stuff matters anymore," he said. "Exactly," I said, helping Sarah save a marshmallow she'd accidentally lit on fire. "Sometimes you have to step away from everything to see life clearly." We talked long into the night. Devin shared his dream of becoming a teacher. Sarah admitted she wanted to be an artist. Marcus confessed he'd been writing poetry in secret. The fire danced across their faces, throwing shadows that felt like they washed away years of pain. When I looked up, Jack caught my eye. He gave me that proud, quiet smile, the one that always made me feel like everything was going to be okay. Under a sky full of stars brighter than any city lights, we weren't just a bunch of troubled teens and their mentors. We were family. A few weeks later, I sat at the kitchen table surrounded by college brochures and application forms. Sunlight poured through the window, warming the scattered papers. My hands trembled a little as I picked up a pen, but my heart was steady. "You've got this," Jack said, setting a mug of coffee beside me. He pulled up a chair, his big frame somehow making it look tiny. "The community college has great programs." I brushed a piece of hair behind my ear. "I never thought I'd be doing this," I admitted. College always felt like something other people did, not someone like me. Jack leaned back and smiled gently. "Someone like you? You mean someone smart, dedicated, and hardworking?" I laughed softly. The past few months had changed me more than I ever expected. The hollow-eyed girl who'd once slept behind dumpsters was gone. Now I was someone who actually believed in tomorrow. "I'm thinking of studying social work," I said, tapping the application. "Maybe I could help other kids like me someday." "You already do," Jack said, nodding toward the house around us. Through the window, we could hear kids laughing in the backyard, playing basketball, soundtracks of a home rebuilt on hope. I started filling out the application carefully. Every question made me reflect. When I reached the address line, my hand didn't hesitate. I wrote down the house number. This place wasn't just shelter anymore. It was home. What do I even say for the essay? I groaned. Describe a significant life experience that shaped who you are. Where do I start? Jack sipped his coffee thoughtfully. Start with the truth. Your story matters, Lily, more than you think. So I wrote. I wrote about cold nights and empty stomachs. About losing my mom, and then losing the life I knew. About Jack finding me and offering 4 words that changed everything. I wrote about hope. About family. About second chances. When Jack came back an hour later, I'd filled the entire page. Want to read it? He pulled up a chair and began reading. As his eyes moved across the page, I saw pride, sadness, and hope flicker across his face. When he reached the end, he cleared his throat before speaking. This is who you are, he said softly. Not just what happened to you, but what you chose to do with it. I swallowed hard, gathering the papers. I wouldn't be here without you, I said, my voice thick. That day outside the diner. You would have found your way, Jack interrupted. You're stronger than you know. We sat in comfortable silence as I sealed the envelope containing my future. Dinner sounds drifted in from the kitchen. Footsteps echoed upstairs. Just normal sounds of our not-so-normal family. Jack watched me with quiet pride. The scared girl he'd met outside that diner was gone. In her place sat a young woman with a future. Late spring sunlight filtered through the windows of the community college auditorium, lighting up row after row of graduates in blue caps and gowns. I sat among them, hands folded in my lap, my heart beating out an excited rhythm. I couldn't stop smiling, not when I thought about how far I'd come, and not when I saw who'd shown up to cheer. Jack sat in the crowd with a whole row of teens from the program. They weren't just spectators, they were my family. Some held handmade signs. Some clutched flowers they'd pooled their money together to buy. Seeing them there, well, it made my eyes sting in the best possible way. Jack showed up to my graduation wearing a pressed button-down shirt instead of his usual leather jacket, and his eyes shone with a kind of pride I'd never seen before. Seeing him there, of all people, made my chest tighten with emotion. As the ceremony went on, I watched the other graduates cross the stage, each one taking their moment in the spotlight. With every name called, my turn came closer. And then, finally, Lily Harper. Hearing my name echo across that auditorium felt unreal. My breath caught. Cheers erupted from the section where Jack and the kids sat. They weren't quiet about it either. Whistles, shouts. That's our girl. The whole deal. People turned to stare, but I didn't care. Those were my people. Walking across that stage felt like floating. The dean handed me my diploma, and I looked out over the crowd. There, in a sea of faces, Jack was on his feet, clapping like he was trying to break his hands. The kids beside him followed suit, some waving handmade signs. I held back tears as I left the stage. After the ceremony, I waded through the crowd still wearing my cap and gown. Jack wrapped me in a hug that lifted me completely off the ground. I knew you could do it, kid, he said, his voice thick with emotion. The teens swarmed around me next. Flowers, hugs, congratulations. Some were new, some had been with us for years, but they all looked at me with the same expression. Hope, belief, possibility. They saw what was possible because one of their own had made it here. Jack cleared his throat, then pulled out a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. I've got something to say, he announced. Everyone gathered around us in a circle, suddenly quiet. Lily, Jack began. His voice was steady, but you could feel the emotion under each word. When you first came to us, you were a scared kid who hadn't eaten in days. And now? Look at you, standing here with a college degree, helping other kids find their way. He glanced down at his note, then back at me. You didn't just survive. You thrived. You took your pain and turned it into purpose. Every kid who walks through our doors sees what's possible because of you. His voice cracked a little, but he pushed through. You're not just a success story. You're a leader, a mentor. He paused, swallowing hard. And you're the daughter I never had. My knees almost buckled. Tears streamed down my cheeks as the kids moved closer, some crying, others nodding, all of them feeling the truth of those words. Jack gestured to the diploma in my hands. That piece of paper isn't just an achievement. It's proof of what happens when someone believes in you, and you learn to believe in yourself. He folded the note and tucked it away. You're the heart of our program, Lily. Everything we stand for, you embody it. Suddenly, I threw my arms around him. My cap tilted sideways, the kids laughing as they joined in, creating a giant group hug. We weren't blood, but we were family. And that meant everything. A few months later, Jack sat in his office with the summer breeze drifting through the open window. Photos covered the walls. Kids who'd made it. Kids who were still finding their way. Right in the center was the picture of me at graduation, smiling like someone who finally knew her place in the world. You sure about this? I asked from the doorway. My confidence had grown these past few years, but a small part of me still felt like that scared girl outside the diner. Jack smiled, slow and certain. More sure than I've ever been. He stood, his shadow stretching across the room. These kids, they need someone who's walked in their shoes. Someone who understands what it's like to claw your way out of the dark. Someone who can show them there's hope. I stepped inside, running my hand along the edge of his desk. But you built this place, I said softly. You're the reason we're all here. Maybe, he replied, emotion thick in his voice. But you're the one who saved it. When the police tried to shut us down, you fought back. You showed everyone what this place really means. We both looked out the window. 3 teenagers were playing basketball in the backyard. Their laughter drifted through the glass. Warm, familiar, alive. I learned from the best, I said, my voice catching slightly. Jack opened his desk drawer and pulled out a ring of keys. They jingled in his calloused hand. Keys to the house, the offices, the storage rooms. Everything. These kids need a guide, he said. Someone who can show them the way out. And that someone is you. When I took the keys, they felt heavier than before, heavier with meaning, heavier with purpose. I'm not disappearing, Jack added, noticing the emotion in my eyes. I'll still be around. Just taking a step back. It's time for new blood, new energy, someone they can truly connect with. Tears blurred my vision. You saved my life, I whispered. Jack shook his head. No, kid. You saved yourself. I just opened the door. For a moment, we stood together in comfortable silence. Outside, one of the teens made a perfect shot, and cheers erupted. The program manual's in the top drawer, Jack said, moving toward the door. Not that you need it. You've been running this place in all but name for months. I walked around the desk and lowered myself into his chair, my chair now. I looked up at him, feeling the shift deep in my bones. What will you do? I asked. He shrugged, a familiar spark in his eye. Got my bike. Might do some traveling. Visit some of our success stories. Maybe scout out places for new programs. He paused in the doorway. But I'll always come back here, he said softly. This is home. And in that moment, I knew the truth. It was my home now, too. I watched as Jack's broad silhouette filled the doorway one last time. He paused, looking back at me with a mixture of pride and trust that hit me straight in the chest. The place is yours now, kid, he said softly. Make it count. I sat up a little straighter in the chair, my chair now, and felt the weight of responsibility settle across my shoulders. But it didn't feel heavy. It felt like purpose. Through the office window, I could already see kids arriving for the afternoon session, faces full of fear, hope, uncertainty, just like mine had been all those years ago. The keys sat warm in my palm, a small but powerful symbol of everything Jack had built, and everything he believed I could continue. I placed them carefully in the top drawer, ready for the next chapter. Later that day, Jack leaned quietly against the doorframe of what used to be his office, watching me work with a teenager who'd arrived just yesterday. The girl reminded me so much of myself, lost, scared, but with a little spark inside her that refused to die. Sometimes the hardest part, I told her gently, sliding a warm cup of coffee across the desk, is letting yourself believe things can get better. I know because I've been exactly where you are. The autumn sunlight spilled through the window, catching the silver in Jack's hair. He'd aged since the day he found me behind the diner, but there was still something powerful about him, something steady. The old leather jacket he wore was broken in and worn thin, a reminder of just how far he'd come from his Hells Angels days. Inside the house, life buzzed all around us, kids laughing in the common room, pots clattering in the kitchen, music drifting down from upstairs. It was everything he had ever dreamed this place would become. You've got this handled better than I ever did, Jack said later, after the girl left. He dropped into the chair across from my desk, the visitor's chair now. I looked up from my notes, Feeling that old familiar warmth spread through me. I learned from the best. Jack chuckled, shaking his head. You've taken everything I started and made it better. The mentoring program, the community outreach, the counseling. That's you, kid. You built that. I glanced around the office. Our story written on the walls. Newspaper clippings celebrating our victories. Photos of graduates beaming with pride. Letters from parents thanking us for giving their kids a fighting chance. Even the old article from the early days hung there. The one that called Jack's work controversial before the community finally understood. Outside the window, the garden we'd planted last spring was alive with color, kids pulling weeds and laughing as they worked. What had once been an abandoned lot was now overflowing with vegetables and flowers. Proof that things grow when you give them a chance. You know what makes me proudest? Jack said quietly. Watching you with these kids. You understand them in a way I never could. You speak their language. I walked around the desk and perched on the edge, facing him. That's not true, I said. You understood me when no one else did. You saw past the anger and the fear. You knew exactly what I needed. A loud burst of laughter thundered from the kitchen, followed by someone yelling about burnt garlic bread. Jack smiled, shaking his head as memories washed over him. I'd seen that same scene play out 100 times through the years. The house feels different now, he said thoughtfully. Warmer somehow. When I started this, all I wanted was to give kids a safe place to sleep. But you turned it into a real home. I squeezed his hand gently. That's because you showed me what a home could be. Now I get to do the same for them. We sat together in a comfortable silence, listening to the heartbeat of the house, the footsteps, the laughter, the clatter of dishes, the quiet conversations drifting through the hallways. Every sound told a story. Every kid passing the door was someone finding their way, just like I had. A newer teen poked her head into the office. Lily, what time does the afternoon workshop start? 4 o'clock, I answered automatically. And don't forget to grab your notebook. She nodded and disappeared, her shoulders more relaxed than they'd been that morning. Jack watched her go, then looked back at me. The pride in his eyes said everything. The torch had been passed, and somehow, the flame was burning brighter than ever.
Це безназвані городки, правильно. Так, щоб поменьше отрезать, даже не буду передивлятися.